Declare open this public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on Trade and Investment Growth for the inquiry into the understanding and utilisation of benefits available under free trade agreements. In accordance with the committee's resolution of 7th of September 2022, this hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of the proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. I now welcome witnesses from Bankwest Curtin Economic Centre via video conference to give evidence today. And for the Hansard record, would you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? So just your name and the capacity you appear for before the committee. And I can hand over to whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, so Dr. Daniel Kiley, I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the bank and representing the Bankwest Curtin Economic Centre.
Thank you. Perhaps Dr. Abe?
Abeba Haila Mariam, I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Bankwest Curtin Economic Centre at Curtin University.
Thank you. And Panagiotis?
Hi, I'm Panos or Panagiotis Sotirakopoulos. I'm a Research Fellow at the Bankwest Curtin Economic Centre.
Thank you. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of the Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a short opening statement of a few minutes, and then we can proceed to a discussion, a very general discussion and an informal Q&A for our benefit and the benefit of the inquiry. We thank you for appearing before us. It's good to have people that have been working in this area to hear firsthand of your knowledge and your on-ground work that you do. Just before I do hand over to you, with us, I might just quickly hand over to the Deputy Chair to do a quick introduction of himself, and Ms Polly as well. Deputy Chair.
Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for appearing today. We know the work that goes in to your submission. Scotty Buchholz, I'm the Deputy Chair, Federal Member for the seat of Wright in Queensland.
And Ms Polly?
Yes, Helen Polly, I'm a Senator from Tasmania and very interested in trade and what you have to say this afternoon.
And I'm the Chair, Steve Georgianis, Federal Member for Adelaide. And we also have with us our Secretariat, who's here as well. On that note, I'll hand over to you, Panos. Or whoever is...
it's Daniel. I'll give the opening remarks on behalf of the team.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. So thank you for the invitation to attend this afternoon's hearing. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we meet on today and pay my respects to elders and senior knowledge holders, past, present and emerging. I'm pleased to be able to summarise some research findings from the Bankwest Curtin Economic Centre that speak to the work of this standing committee. Item A of the committee's terms of reference invites consideration of the level of understanding present of the social and economic benefits provided by FTAs. It is well established that free and fair trade contributes to economic growth, creates job opportunities, and offers consumers improved variety of imported goods and services. But less is known about the benefits of FTAs and trade to the average Australian household. BCEC research measured the channels through which trade impacts households, namely employment, household disposable income, and cost of living effects. Taking the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, or CHAFTA, as a case study, BCEC estimated that trade with China elevated the average Australian household disposable income by $2,600 in 2022-2023 alone. FTAs support productive and high-wage jobs. The number of jobs in Australia related to trade with China was estimated at just under 600,000 in 2022-2023. And without trade with China, BCEC estimated that Australians would experience a 4.2% rise in expenses if the same imported goods were to be sourced from countries outside of Australia's primary trading partners. On item B, the take-up of FTAs by Australian businesses, a series of unique BCEC small business surveys tracked the sales reach of small businesses across Western Australian regions. The research found that in 2020, just over 11% of small businesses, that's businesses employing between 0 and 19 employees, based in Perth sell to international markets. International trade brings many opportunities, but also brings risks. The agricultural sector is particularly exposed to fluctuations in external markets and global demand, with 28% of WA's small business sales volumes going to international markets in 2020. This was up 15 percentage points on the levels reported in 2017. And our research found that in 2020, well over half of small businesses that sell to international markets were in a worse financial shape because of the pandemic, both in metropolitan Perth and in regional WA. The impacts of COVID-19 border closures and supply chain disruptions had an immediate and sizable effect on the balance sheets of small businesses. Chinese tariffs and trade restrictions imposed on Australian exports, such as barley, wine, lobster and beef, also impacted trade, but to differing levels by product and sector. There is a need to track the impact of trade opportunities and disruptions on the SME sector and the speed at which small businesses can react to and recover from such shocks. With the emergence of new technologies, green trade, and ever-increasing global nature of trade, it is more important now than ever before for Australian businesses of all sizes to engage in global trade and international investment opportunities. And now to the issue of monitoring and measuring FTA utilisation, item E. BCEC's 2023 Trading Up report used a gravity model approach to provide insights on the utilisation of FTAs by exploiting variations in trade flows between countries. Specifically, this model estimates the overall change in trade value due to FTAs. Findings demonstrate a net increase in overall trade flows due to the implementation of FTAs. Estimates show that since signing respective FTAs, Australian exports to China increased by $275 billion, exports to Japan increased by $99 billion, and exports to Thailand increased by $57 billion, compared to a counterfactual without FTAs. With quality data, this approach can be further parameterised and adapted to estimate the benefits of FTAs across different population groups, business sectors and regions. So in conclusion, our research shows that FTAs provide many benefits to Australian businesses and Australian society. Further work to track these benefits at the household, business and various government levels is important as the nation looks to build on existing trade relationships. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Kiley. Anyone else would like to add anything? Or we'll just go straight to questions and answers. Just very quickly, I'll kick off with a couple of questions. And just in your while you were giving us your opening statements towards the end, you spoke about 2023, the measurements, and there was a net increase due to FTAs, and you mentioned some figures. Was that net increase, did that take into account the period of COVID where we had the shutdowns, and obviously a lot of trade went southward as well? So does it take in that period as well? Or were there adjustments made for that?
No, it took into account the period during and after COVID.
So without COVID, it would have been even greater. Would that be your understanding of it? Yes.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Absolutely, due to the disruptions in trade, that's very much likely to be the case.
So the net benefit of the assumption one would make from those figures is that the net benefit of FTAs is obviously positive on the Australian economy.
Absolutely, yeah. It's positive in terms of overall trade value, but also then that the study that we've done for China, for example, alone saw that there's significant impact on employment, household income, and also cost of living effects. Because again, that's an aspect that's often forgotten about, is the importance of imports to Australia as well, and ease of access to such through the free trade agreements. which enables households and businesses here to obtain cheaper and more variety of inputs and household items and goods. And again, our study showed, should they be sourced from the next best alternative source, it would cost more. And therefore, I think particularly in the current economic climate with cost of living effects, that's a really important point and issue around the importance of trade for households.
Thank you. Another question I have, part of this, the terms of reference of this inquiry is one of the areas that we're looking at is we want to look into what extent our regional and our diaspora in Australia, being a very multicultural country, we have community groups, etc., small businesses that have been established over the years where people actually have direct contact with different nations around the world through their heritage. And many have got businesses where they're trading amongst products, whether there's an FTA agreement or not. And I was just wondering, in your work, have you looked at any of these businesses in terms who are actually doing some great stuff, exporting, importing, and what can governments do, or what can the structure around our import-export be better placed to do to assist these businesses or to learn from them?
Look, that's a really good question. We didn't, and one of the recommendations we have is there's often limitations with data. So if we had access to better quality data that drilled down at this level, where you could, certainly not that we're aware of or have been able to do, to drill down to that level, to look at, for example, how are Indigenous businesses doing in terms of international trade. Yeah. It's quite difficult to do that. So I think with better quality data, that would be possible. Mm-hmm. Again, the surveys we did of small businesses, it didn't enable us to drill down to that level. But I think you're right. Like our general sense would be that there's absolutely, I think, great opportunities and potential for the linkages through diaspora having connections with international markets. I think the importance of international education there as well plays a really important role, where we build, that soft diplomacy, but also those business-to-business links when international students say return home or even stay here to work. They have those connections, which are really important. But again, I think more work to track those would be really beneficial.
Thank you. And my last question before I hand over to the other members is, I suppose it's widely accepted that FTAs support additional jobs and better paid jobs. Have you done any work looking at precisely how this is achieved by FTAs? In other words, we know that some of the data shows that it's producing jobs, but better paid jobs and better secure jobs.
So so the idea of the research is that we compare what would happen without FTA and with FTA. So the key finding is that in terms of the quantity of employment and also in the quality of jobs and wages, than with FTA, there is a higher impact on these metrics like jobs and quality of work, job and also wages.
So the pay is higher. Well, the data shows that the pay is higher. Why is that? Why is that? Have you looked at why that comes about?
Yeah. So ideally, the main concept of the international trade is that you are selling to the international market, when we have a higher payment in the international market than in the domestic market. That's one of the reasons for international trade. So that's one reason. And also then in terms of also competitiveness of the businesses, for example, if the export sector is competitive in that area, and then they are able to provide more employment and also higher wage compared to the less competitive sectors. And because those competitive sectors, for example, engaged in international export.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Deputy Chair then to...
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. As I said in my opening remarks, there's considerable amount of work going into your document, and I appreciate it. Just a question to start off with. You know, when you've done your data, is it through the benefit of household benefit of $2,600? When we look at the terms of trade on exports, given by imports, which one do we get more benefit out of, the export or the import? I mean, and I asked this question through the prism of my mum the other day asked me to go and price her up some televisions, and the point that you made about cost of production coming down, she thought she'd be in for $2,500. I said, Mum, you'll get a good TV for $700.
$600, yeah.
But have you guys pulled the numbers apart? And I know you're a mineral resource-rich state. Where do we get more of the upside from? Is from the export or the import?
That's a good question. Actually, this is more straightforward, and definitely that's from export side. There are two reasons, I would say. On the one hand, for example, like in terms of exports of goods and services, we are net exporters, and especially the WA state. That is one reason. And then another reason is that, for example, in terms of imports, there are some concerns, for example, especially like the manufacturing sector, probably with cheap labor, for example, let's say from Asian countries, like from China, it's more cheaper to import from other countries. Therefore, in that case, the manufacturing sector may be competitive. In that case, there may be loss of jobs in the manufacturing sector, but then dominantly, the Australian economy is like the resource sector is playing a dominant role in the international trade. And from that point, the net benefit is positive, which means the exporters, the benefit from exporting activities, and also plus with the import itself also, there's like, for example, farmers engaged in transportation and distribution that creates jobs opportunities. And with that plus, especially from the export side, that outweighs the costs in terms of loss of employment from non-competitive sectors like the manufacturing sector. So definitely from the export sector. Yeah.
So if you were to just ballpark, just on that 2,600 benefit from our 18 free trade agreements, where would you do the split? 2,600 or even, just roughly? And I know your data has touched it, but it just helps me get a better sense of how it splits.
Yeah, that is like, we didn't exactly like split this part attributed to this part, but definitely then the ones attributed from the import is very, very low compared to the part attributed to exports.
But if I could also just add to that as well. So, I mean, you, in terms of the cost of living effects, we did see, those states that import more from overseas have a greater cost of living benefit from trade as well. Okay, so there's that side of it as well. So the import, I agree with Abibe in terms of the employment generated, the high quality jobs. Much of that is through our exports, but some, of course, as well through imports. But that imports has a massive impact in terms of cost of living effects, and the ability of businesses then as well to keep their production costs low, where these imports form part of their supply chain process and enable us to remain more competitive than others may be able to do.
You don't want to have a go at roughly drawing a line in the middle of your 2,600 as to what supports what? Benefit. I'm not going to hold you to it. I just want to get a sense of where you think the fulcrum is.
I'd say you'd probably be looking at 70-80% to exports.
Okay. That's all.
But again, look, that's unconfirmed number.
Of course.
We
No, that's fine. Thanks, Chair. I can come back later on to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Polly.
Yes, thank you very much. One of the things I've noticed through the course of this inquiry is that there is a lack of knowledge within businesses, depending on their size, as to the fact that we even have trade agreements that might impact their businesses. So I know you've touched on this in your submission, but is there anything you want to add in terms of the importance and what we can do to communicate better with businesses. I'm just alarmed that we already have some really high-tech, good quality exporting that most people don't know is coming from Australia.
Yeah, again, I think it's really important, like the likes of the reports that we do and the demonstration of the impact that this has, say, at the household level. I think that's really important for households to understand how trade really impacts and benefits them and can inform the media and public debates around this. I think the same is the case for businesses. I think there's two things here. One is again, continuing to promote and talk about FTAs, demonstrate some good case studies as to where there has been success on the back of FTAs, again, then trying where possible, because particularly SMEs where they don't have the scale or the ability perhaps to de-risk some of their initial steps in engaging with international markets, to further support businesses around that. And I think there are supports out there through DFAT, various, the likes of the Small Business Development Commission and the likes that are providing skills to businesses to engage with different markets. But again, further promotion around this and perhaps even further funding to increase the amount of this activity, because I think it's becoming increasingly important. And again, as we said, particularly as it relates to the decarbonisation agenda, green trade, and the opportunities there are very real and very large for Australian businesses. So again, it's really important that we don't miss out on those opportunities and that businesses of all sizes are engaging in those opportunities.
Look, I'm from Tasmania, so we were impacted greatly, particularly in primary industry, when China closed their doors to us, and they still haven't opened it up to our crayfish, lobster, best in the world, and we produce the best salmon. So do you think, though, there's enough awareness within industries about ensuring that they have more than one market and that they should be constantly investigating, and whether or not we're doing enough through Austrade and DFAT to ensure that information is spread to the business sector and particularly around manufacturing?
Again, look, I think there's a lot of really tuned in, very smart business owners out there that are well aware of the need to diversify. As you would be aware from the examples you spoke to there, I think some businesses were able to diversify and switch markets easier than others. So, for example, in the case of barley, our studies showed that barley exports could quickly transition to Saudi Arabia, for example, and we saw, for example, then this. And this is a really important point, actually. The international trade is very complex, very interconnected, right? So we saw, for example, that China increased its imports of barley from the likes of Russia and Ukraine, whereas we transitioned more towards Saudi Arabia. And there was an ability to do that and to pivot. And I think scale has a big part to play there. Obviously, with the likes of rock lobster and the importance of being fresh and fresh produce, fresh exports, distance is a bigger issue there. And I know the freight issues were an important and constraint as well during the pandemic for much of that sector. But again, I guess businesses, I think, we can certainly do more perhaps to increase their awareness and ensure that they do diversify their portfolio. But that said, it's equally expected that they will go to which market is willing to pay highest for their product at any particular time if they have that ability to pivot. But certainly having other options, having built relationships and partnerships with other countries so that it increases your ability to pivot. We've also, in our engagements with some stakeholders, for example, some of the wine exports to China that were very niche, very particular for the Chinese market, it was harder for those businesses, again, to pivot to other markets that perhaps didn't want that type of wine or maybe didn't have the brand identity in other markets. So again, absolutely more can be done to market, to support these businesses in making sure that they can pivot in a quicker manner to other markets.
And my final question, thank you, Chair, but
That's all right.
I have a local manufacturer who most of what they manufacture go into America and into Europe at the moment. But what they say is it's very costly to participate in trade fairs. I was just wondering whether you have had anything from your data actually would reinforce that perhaps the government should be looking at putting more money into assisting our manufacturers and exporters at these trade fairs. And do we need to fund Austrade a little more as well? Easy question.
Yeah, as part of like our extensive survey of the literature in doing the research, I can say two things probably that are important. And one thing we realized is that the requirement of the rule of origin certification is less clear for many exporters, and that is kind of an issue for these businesses to utilize the market or it increase their cost. The process of certification is kind of not clear for exporters. That's one thing. And another thing which is important is like the market is like changing continuously. Therefore, understanding the market, for example, let's say the shift in consumer demand, for example, one thing, for example, let's say if you talk about, for example, like wine exporters, like there is some evidence that like the Chinese consumers are like shifting from red wine to like white, from red wine, and therefore like the change in consumer demand, understanding the change in consumer demand may be important. In that case, like available evidence, like market research that may be facilitating this research may be helpful, probably. And yeah, so these things, the role of origin certification must be clear, and understanding the market would help like on helping exporters. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I could just add as well to that, and another project we're doing for the Wheat Belt Development Commission here, we had some engagement with stakeholders across the region, and just one, and again, it's just anecdotal from one discussion was some farmers, for example, I know your question was to manufacturing, but have had the scale and the ability to go themselves directly to international markets and engage and build relationships and partners. Others, and particularly smaller businesses, will very much rely on the likes of the trade fairs that DFAT support. These are really critical to again, particularly when they don't have that ability to organise and engage with new markets themselves. They don't have that scale. So I think, certainly there's some great work being done there by the government and both state and federal governments. And, certainly I think additional supports there to build and enhance those and to open new markets is really critical.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Polly, Senator Polly. We've had Dr. Gillespie just join us as well. And just before I hand over to Dr. Gillespie, I'm going to ask you a really a question, and I'm hoping that you can dumb it right down for us politicians who basically nowhere near the same knowledge in this area as you guys are. And some of the answers we already know, but it would really be good, like when an FTA is put into agreement, a trade agreement's done, signed, sealed and delivered, what are the steps that are taken once that's done in terms to facilitate increased trade? So, for example, we know that there's a reduction in tariffs, therefore we can sell our product overseas and consumers overseas can buy it at a cheaper rate, and that's where that opportunity comes in to export more. But in terms of the benefiting businesses in Australia, not just the ones that are already exporting, but others that may have potential to export, are there steps that basically what basically happens once it's signed, a free trade agreement? And I mean, this would be a good question as well for DFAT, but just want to pick your brains as well. The procedure once a trade agreement signed.
Okay. Look, to be honest, we haven't looked at any depth in terms of that process. It's more that the data and the outcomes of such that is our area of expertise. So again, I couldn't say that I could speak with any confidence to that. That said, I do know that DFAT, organises lots of information sessions for businesses and for key industry bodies to make sure that they're aware of that. I also believe they have input in earlier stages before the FTAs are agreed upon, and so that you have that input along the way. But, I guess then on the back of the FTAs, you have the various trade fairs and trade missions that you talked about, which, again, signal very much the bilateral relations and the strength of such for businesses. But I certainly can't speak with any confidence to the more around the process of that, unless Abiba or Panos can add.
Would anyone like to add to that? Or, no. Okay, thank you. I'll hand over to Dr. Gillespie, who's just joined us.
Yeah, thanks very much for your submission. Apologies, we had other things occurring in the House. Look, in your submission, the thing that stood out is the benefit to a family, $2,600, because of the disposable goods they buy from, which we've imported from China. But trade is a two-way thing. I'm hoping that you might have looked at barriers that Australia puts in the way, not for China to import stuff, but the barriers that we put in place of our own industry, which makes them uncompetitive. I mean, we've got to the stage where we're making exports of some products illegal, namely, you're both based in WA, I assume. Like, if you looked at the negative consequences of, say, the live sheep ban, because there were 3,000 farm industry people directly employed by it, let alone down the value chain. But other makers of goods say, well, look, Canada can export things cheaper from them. Have you looked at the trade barriers we put in place through our regulation, our bans, our whatever, and keep our exporters with their hands tied behind their back?
So just one point to clarify, first of all, the household disposable income effect is for both export and import. So it's overall trade intensity that we model for those household disposable income effects. We didn't look directly at the barriers from the Australian side to our exporters, but that's certainly, I think, an interesting avenue that could be looked at further and investigated. But overall trade, exports and imports that increased, on the back of FTAs, we have seen increased trade intensity, which has benefits to households, both in terms of income, employment, and also in terms of lower cost of living effects. I think certainly, your example there around the live sheep exports, I guess this is where, trade is more than the pure economics of it. There is the other aspects that need to be considered in terms of, if this is an issue around treatment of animals, for example, and what's the right behaviour and activity for Australian, as a nation to engage in. But, this also asks questions, I guess, around, if we are putting barriers such as that in place, are there supports then that can also help these businesses transition? Yeah. Or, do we do some of the downstream meat processing, for example, here, which of course could benefit growth in certain industries, and where we could add additional value there. But again, obviously the kind of cost-benefit analysis that would need to be undertaken and understood better. But, again, I think once there's additional supports as well provided to such industries where their trade might be particularly impacted by such policies.
Yeah. On other non-agricultural industries, have you looked at the consequences of our energy policies, particularly in Western Australia, where their electricity costs and minerals exports out of the West are massive, but we don't value add any of it, and that's another area I thought would be good to analyse. What value are we leaving for someone else to make the money by not processing our minerals here, which then goes back to the existential problem of our energy prices, means a lot of refining can't happen, whether it's iron ore or gold or anything. Have you looked at those sort of costs that we put on ourselves?
So that's a very good question.
Excuse, don't mean to cut you off, but the bells are ringing, which means we have to go down for a division. So we might end it there. Thank you for coming today. I've been asked to provide, if you've been asked to provide any other information, perhaps that question, you'll be sent a transcript of all the evidence today. You'll have an opportunity to change it if you think there's any errors done. And finally, I'd like to thank the members for their attendance, and thank you very much. I'll declare this public meeting closed.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. And I apologise.